How's it going? Welcome to Wander on the Way, a show that is an ode to hours spent in coffee shops, late night get-togethers with friends, walks outside, and long car rides. Basically, all the times and places we get a moment to slow down to be present with ourselves and those around us. My name is Josh Perry, and I'll be your companion today for a little while. Join me and my occasional guests as we take a look at all the messy little details of being human. And remember, you're not lost as long as you say you're wandering. Welcome everyone, and welcome back to another guest installment of Wander on the Way. Today's guest is Richard Taylor Jr., a motivational speaker, mental health advocate, and author whose own personal experiences in high school and college helped shape him into the powerhouse he is today. A quick word of caution about today's episode before we begin. While we don't get into the details too much or discuss some of the trauma involved, Richard's experiences center heavily around his multiple suicide attempts, the last of which he narrowly survived. Today, we are going to focus on the important takeaways that he has kept close to his heart, the sorts of things he struggled to learn and now spends his life traveling to educate others about. His message is all about doing what it takes to put the lessons that life gives us into practice, rather than merely talking a good game. For Richard, his faith and faith community served as the vessel for finally putting action behind his beliefs, something he and I agree is essential. As you listen today, think about the ways in which you might be more talk than action, and look for opportunities to do what you already know you can do to be more closely aligned with your intentions. Welcome, Richard. I'm glad to have you here today. I'm actually pretty excited for the conversation. It's been quite a while since we've had a chance to chat and since we've seen each other in person. So how are you, and would you introduce yourself for a second?
Definitely. Josh, it's good to see you. I know it's been, almost 3 years now since the last time I seen you in person was
Maybe
2019.
more,
I think.
yeah.
Yeah, it might have been more. Yeah. Well, either way, it's definitely good to be here with you. Congratulations on the podcast, by the way, too.
Yeah,
I think
thanks.
that's awesome. From one podcaster to another, I think that is massively important. And I love conversations. I love when things can just kind of go out. You never know what perspective can help people and change. So I don't take it lightly when somebody, decides to do one. Definitely as someone who procrastinated for like 5 years before finally doing his own, right? And so I think that it's great that you just like grabbed the bull by the horns and was like, let's do it.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm not
man.
sure
So it's
I
good to be here with you.
dove into it. I've had definitely some people in my life that have been like, you might want to try this out, and I've been kind of resisting for years. So I get a little bit of that procrastination myself.
Yeah, but you got it done, man, and you're killing it. And so I'm excited. I'm definitely grateful to be here, man. So I know you said tell a little bit about myself. My name is Richard Taylor Jr., originally from Chicago, Illinois. Now a resident in Seattle, Washington. Mental health advocate, some say expert. I just say expert of my own experience. Author, speaker, like I said, podcaster. I do a lot of stuff around the realm of mental health, and just really helping people in life in general. Also serve as a worship leader. I'm out here in Seattle at the church that I attend. Man, I'm a lover of people. I don't consider myself a thought leader. Like that title has been thrown around a lot with my name, and I'm like, I'm just a guy with a few ideas, right? So,
and a lot of it based on your own experience, right? Like that's kind of where this is all coming from.
Definitely, man. Overcomer, survivor of a multitude of suicide attempts from the age of 10 to 20. Dealt with depression and anxiety, so that was a huge part of what led me into that space to begin with when we talk about suicide and just some of the struggles and dealings there. So all of these different components that have led me up into this space, and it is the experience. But I will say that I think that as people, it's important for us to make sure that we are leaning into those experiences and even being able to speak from those experiences, because of the fact that man, a lot of times, whether we know it or not, that's what people tend to like gravitate to the most.
Sure.
I find more and more just interesting that people care to hear about like what you've been through and how you overcame it. And from that, I noticed that they take to really try and like utilize with their own lives and their own selves.
Absolutely. Yeah, and in a way, that's really a lot of what this podcast is for, is, you know, bringing on folks like you that you got a story to tell.
Yeah.
And people like to hear it. People like being asked about it and kind of what they got going on.
100%.
But so you sort of mentioned a little bit of the broad spectrum of content kind of stuff that you do, right? You're speaking, you're an author, doing podcast. I know last time I spoke with you, I think you had just released Between the Dream. Maybe I think that might have been the last book that I remember you putting out. But I know you're pretty prolific. So what you got going on now?
No, I think it might have been Love Between My Scars. I think that was the
Okay.
last one, the black cover. Yeah, Love Between My Scars, because I saw you when I came up to NY in was it 2017, 18,
Yeah.
one of those two. And so it's been a lot more since then. He ended up doing a student edition to Between the Dream actually in 2017. And 2018, I took that year to write. And I released a book at the top of 2019 called geez, I can't even remember my own can't remember my own work, Josh. What's happening right now?
Doing too
The
much.
Other Side, Freedom from Depression and Suicide. So I released The Other Side in 2019. Started working with a lot of our Spanish speaking populations between our trio programs and Gear Up and just everywhere between New York, Jersey, Cali, the Arizona area, and then in Puerto Rico as well. And so I ended up doing my first Spanish translated book, which was a translation of The Other Side. And then last year I released 31 Days of Power, a simplified approach to everyday mental health, which was essentially, you know, this book based around Mental Health Awareness Month, which is in May. And so the 31 days of May, essentially 31 days of power.
Nice. And I get the feeling from some of the stuff I've seen that's a bit more like a workbook, or like it's something you kind of go through throughout the month, or is that right?
It can be treated like a workbook, or it can be treated like just an everyday book.
Just a book.
So if you wanted to just read through it, you could. The workbook feel is pretty dope though, because it does have like a set list of like 3 to 4 questions at the end of each chapter. And then, you know, a page just to kind of write. You know, I think reflection is huge. And I definitely believe that journaling is huge when you talk about not just from the standpoint of building your mental health, but I think even from an awareness standpoint of your mental and your emotional, being able to understand yourself, understanding your patterns, you know, some of the things that you do in life, like all of those things are massively important. And so I really wanted to try and bring that to life with this book.
Okay. And speaking of that, like one of the big focuses of these talks that I'm doing is kind of trying to connect some of the philosophies, like the things that we believe and want to put into the world with like our everyday actions. And so is that stuff that you yourself are doing? Is that also kind of a part of your experience? Like, are you journaling? Are you doing this work too?
Yes, definitely. 100%. And I think that it is super important. You got to be able to practice what you teach, right? And so here's the reality. Like I think that I'm literally taking what has helped me and I'm putting it out there, right? And so that's essentially the approach. The goal is to practice it, you know, before it comes, right? Because it's one thing for us to plan it, right? But application, it's so funny. I believe we as humans have all of the knowledge and wisdom in the world. But I think where we tend to miss the boat is right there at the application part, right? And sometimes when we choose to apply as well.
Where did you pick that up? Like your own practices of journaling and paying attention?
Just, I think a lot of it originally came from like the practices that I had to start coming off of my final suicide attempt, right? And going to see a therapist for the first time. And in that, you know, these are some of the things that were encouraged as far as like, hey, let's go ahead and do this and give it a shot. And then from there, you know, just kind of put my own flair to it, taking my own like little, you know, little twist and saying, okay, well, let's see how this will work, or what would it look like if this was implemented, you know. And that was really helpful too. And so I think those components really made a huge difference early on. And yeah, I think too, just like keeping up with the industry as it pertains to like mental health, when it comes to like what are some practices that we're finding are like really beneficial for people, you know. But then also too, man, I think just I've always been a firm believer of really diving into productive activities that
Mhm.
help us. And the beauty is that that looks different for everybody, right?
Okay.
But one of my only caveat to that is that we got to stick to that word productive, because not
Yeah.
every activity, while it might be fun, might not necessarily be productive, right? And so in that, I think I talk about this in the 31 Days of Power. Like some of us might identify it as finding our muse, but
Mm.
essentially you found something that not only brings you joy, but also keeps you in a good state of mind, you know, that helps you when you could be hitting a downward spiral, you know?
Sure.
And that's essentially what it is. It's been a mix of all of those components together.
Okay. And I noticed, like you said, you kind of put your own flair, you put your own spin on it. So, do you have like a good example? Obviously, without like ruining too much about the work you're doing, but like,
Oh,
what
you
what
good?
is the Richard brand of some of these practices?
Man, you know what? It's so funny. Like for me, they vary, but it could be something as little as like I love music, so I'll sing myself out of a funk sometimes, you
All
know,
right.
or like I'll have like random dance parties.
Okay.
You know, we talk
A
about
high
music,
energy here.
music therapy, right? You talk about music therapy and how like music can definitely invoke different thoughts and feelings. And
Absolutely.
so it could be like an interrupter. It acts as an interrupter for me. I'll just kind of dance it out. But then also too, you know, some of these practices might be like when I talk about like things that you enjoy doing, right? Things that if for nothing
Mhm.
else, I need to smile. I need to breathe, right? It could be going off the waterfront and just sitting at the water listening to the waves crash. It could be for me, I love architecture and I love seeing how people think when it comes to building. So like I'll
Mm.
drive and I will literally just go and look at homes. You
Mhm.
know, like it's the small things, right? And whether I got music playing while I'm doing it or if I'm just taking it all in the silence and in the stillness of it, I notice that it calms me. It helps me
Mhm.
to breathe. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention too, like another great practice for me specifically is the community aspect, right?
Mm.
Having a good group of people around. So whether it's a friend that's letting me vent or a friend that I am coming up with a new idea with, like
Mhm.
those moments are very therapeutic. It's
That
not
interaction.
therapy, but it is a therapeutic practice. And I love that because I'm like, you know, it's these small things that don't cost a lot of money or any money at all sometimes that can be such a great benefactor within it. Journaling sometimes has turned into books for me. You know, like
Mhm.
literally, some of the products that I've put out have started off as like just my journaled thoughts, and so
Mhm.
I love that it's like you just never know what it could be when it comes to some of the things that speak to you, and then I'll put my own twist on something like journaling. How would I write this in a song? Right?
Mm.
Or how would I
Interesting.
write this as a stage play? I love comic books. I am a huge comic book fan. How would I
All right.
write these emotions into a character as a comic book character, right? Or as a comic story, right? Like, so the flair of like, oh, wow, like what they say, they turn lemons into lemonades.
Mhm.
Like, that's essentially how I see it from time to time.
All right. I love that, especially the community part of it, and you kind of hit that nail on the head in a way that like it's free, right? You don't need to go out and buy something that someone's like, hey, take care of yourself. Like just you got some of that community around you, and you can bounce these
Yeah.
ideas off of them. Where's that faith of yours kind of fit into all of this and your own personal journey?
It's kind of like as honestly at every portion of the journey. Like I grew up in church. My grandparents had 11 kids and they raised all of them in church. My mom and dad raised us up so in the Christian faith, and yeah, that was a huge part. Like, and so for me, even with the struggles that I was going through, there was always something there, just as far as like feeling some sense of belonging.
Mhm.
Not necessarily even just going to church, but I could be listening to I could be listening to a gospel song, or some sort of worship song, and just having this like overwhelming feeling, which is really interesting because I became a ministry leader in high school, and during
Oh,
that time, I'm yeah in high school, but more so college, and this was like at the peak of my struggle though,
mhm.
so for a long time I've been really good at being a hypocrite. I had been really good at like the outer showings of it
Yeah.
all, like, oh, look, I know how to like shout and speak in tongues. I know how to do this, but I sucked when it came to not necessarily loving others, but loving myself. Like,
Mhm.
like there were a lot of components there. I was very judgmental then, and so
Mhm.
I wasn't utilizing the faith and what I said I believed in a way where it was inviting to others, where it was something, or that it even produced kind of any evidence or fruit for my life. And
It's maybe
so I
more
think that
performative in a way.
very performative, 100%. And so, yeah, it wasn't until my final suicide attempt. And by this time, like I was a president of a Christian fraternity. I was
Mm.
one of the leaders for my school's gospel choir on the executive board, and also um as like one of the vocal like leaders as well. And so um yeah, it was really interesting, like that it was at that space of brokenness that I realized that the relationship that I had claimed to have with God was not really what I had,
Mhm.
flaunted it to be in that performative space, like you said. And so really having this like awakening there of like truly just diving into what I said I believe.
Mhm.
And so the faith has been a huge part too, because I think when I really took the opportunity to not only believe what I was reading and hearing, but to apply it to my life, once again, the application word,
Yeah.
right? But taking the application piece, I think that's where I really got a chance to see the shift.
Okay. And so what did
But
that
it's
look
been there
like?
the whole time.
How did you go about kind of applying it? And I guess like if you could paint a bit of a picture between the you that was very performative versus maybe like were you more contemplative? Like what was that
Not
transition like?
necessarily more contemplative. Yes, contemplative, but it was here's the thing. It was one of those like practice what you teach type of joints where
Mm.
I like behind closed doors. How am I living? How am I treating my body? How am I treating myself? Because a lot of
Mhm.
the issues that I dealt with, they were stemmed from like issues of like validation or
Mhm.
acceptance. We talk about the depression and the anxiety, like it stemmed from being bullied. So like
Mhm.
all of those negative things that I believed about myself from those negative experiences. And then
Mhm.
also too, you couple that with the fact that, we're in a faith where we claim this power of like this amazing God who loves us, who sees us, who cares. Like, and I'm like, man, I'm like, am I really living my life like I believe this?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And then am I also showing that to others? So for me, it definitely came through more of what I was doing in my private time, like actually taking time to like pray and just kind of sit there and be still and not get so caught up in the movement of life, because I'm a heavy mover,
Mhm.
like boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
always all around, all over the place. So like changing that portion up was really important.
Mhm.
But then also too, like I think being at such a low place, it gave me an opportunity to really learn to like greater, like deeply empathize with others who are struggling. And I think that
Mhm.
was a huge part of it too. So it wasn't performative, it was actually the belief in action.
Mhm.
It was literally being able to sit with those who, now that I've gone through this, I mean, my suicide attempt, my final one, took place on the college campus, and it made its waves throughout the entire campus
Mhm.
via the police beat at the back of the school newspaper, via social
Mhm.
media, via word of mouth. Like, and mind you, I was like at the pivotal, like I'm ministry leader at that time. I'm like
Mhm.
doing all of this stuff. People see me in all of these different realms. And so you're talking about like now coming back into a space once I got back from the hospital and got back on campus, like black sheep, like people
Mhm.
whispering, like all of that. And so it gave me a greater opportunity to see some of those people that I had judged or that I had looked at, and not realizing that we all carry our own mess. And so how am I even practicing that part when it comes to the application of being present to lean in with others, to really walk that thing through.
And now I just had to kind of go back to something you said a second there, but I find it hard to believe that in your current state and like what you do and how you do it, that you have slowed down from that moment. So I can't imagine what you were like prior to what you are now.
So slow down for me comes in like a different form. Like I've learned not to feel guilty about taking moments to rest.
Okay.
I've learned not to feel guilty about taking a 20-minute nap if I'm tired, like listen to your body type of thing, right? Slowing down for me is you've worked really hard, you've grinded. I'm going to choose to take this 2 to 3 hours to actually just go and sit on a boat and just rock with the waves instead of feeling the need to like let me hop on Google and search upcoming conferences and trying to throw my name in the hat. Like slowing down is like instead of feeling like I need to do, it's funny, I'm actually preaching on this tomorrow as we close out this series around this like notion of habits, right? And these habits that we develop, but this idea of the assignment that we carry in taking care of ourselves. And so for me, slowing down literally is just more of the self-care practices and making sure that I'm pouring into myself or being poured into,
Sure.
all of those areas.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people right now kind of wrestling with this being doing divide that you're talking about. It sounds like you're kind of leaning a little bit more into like, I'm just gonna be for a second. I don't need to be so much worried about the doing.
Well, and I think it's important too, Josh, because like so for me, like I'm in Seattle, right? And so we are, one of the booming tech havens of this country. And with that, very fast-paced life. You got folks working 12 to 14 hours a day, very heavy grind culture. And so I think even in me being able to see that, has got me to thinking like, I don't want to be that. Like,
Sure.
understanding that there is still so much more to life. And in the spirit of trying to grind it out and up the next person or to do all of these other things, I think sometimes I realize that you add so much stress onto your body, which can start to strip away years and time for your life from your life, excuse me. So
yeah. And I feel like from a lot of the conversations that I've been having with some other folks that there is a bubble of society that's sort of growing and growing with this attitude. Like we're watching that hustle culture and we're like, that's not me.
Absolutely. And I think what people are realizing too is that within their realization, they are coming to a standpoint of understanding that even once they come back to the work or whatever in life that they put on pause, it's still going to be there.
Yeah.
And it'll still get done. You can't add extra time like to a day. So you get done what you can and you learn to embrace where you are. And I think in that too, man, when you talk about like with how we navigate and move forward in life and the things that we do, one of the things that you will find a lot of times is that I think in the resting is where you get a lot of your great ideas. That's where you get your next big idea. That's where in you being able to rest, you've given your mind an opportunity to be able to just to a degree play catch up, to come with fresh thoughts and fresh perspective. And so, it is really important. And I love the fact that more people are, coming out of that reality that is the hustle and grind culture to say like, I'm just going to have enough faith and trust that I'm put on this earth for a reason greater than myself. And because of that, I'm going to be taken care of as I take care of myself.
I feel like we covered a bunch of ground here today, but I'm curious, like, is there anything you feel like we didn't really touch on that you're just burning to get out there and chat about?
No, we do. You got a lot. You got a lot. It's funny because I don't usually have many opportunities on podcasts where we talk about like just the faith and the drive behind it. But
Yeah.
no, man, we did a lot. This was great, man. I love it too. Just being able to really get these thoughts out here like that. And you even gave me some stuff to think on too when it comes to like um just just the practices as the season gets ready to change.
Mm-hmm.
And times are going to get real good for people because the seasonal affect disorder is going to slow down, right? But I'm like, hey, how do you keep those practices going even in the good, right?
Yeah.
How do you keep those going? And also too with the idea that a lot of places, states, cities moving back to some sense of normalcy. How do you, in the spirit of moving forward, how do you stay with the progress of like, I'm not going to revert back to my old self and grinding myself into the dirt. So no, bro, this was phenomenal, man.
And that's the big temptation, right? As things go back to normal, it can be so easy to slot back into the old ways, right? They're familiar. We're used to it. We understand it. But like, how do we take this stuff that we've had for the last 2 years and carry it with us?
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, one of the big questions that probably a lot of us are going to be wrestling with for the next year or two.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's where I'm trying to help right now. As I've noticed it, I'm like, I want to be able to add some insight to that hopefully somebody can take and maybe it'll help.
Yeah. So why don't we we'll end on kind of a final thought along those lines, perhaps. But what are you taking away? Like, you've had a couple of years of reflection, and how is the next 10 years for you going to be different than the past 10 years?
Oh, that's a solid question, Josh. I don't know if I even have a full answer to that. I'm like,
I wouldn't expect you to.
Right? I think a lot of stuff is still up in the air when it comes to just like things that are completely out of our prediction. But I think I know for me personally, though, when you talk about just like what I would take moving forward and just kind of applying it, man, I feel like we always have an opportunity as humans to grow and learn, right? So I want to continue to learn. And I know that learning comes from being able to lean in, being able to stay connected. I want to be able to create platforms and opportunities where people can continue to connect on a deeper way, though, right? Not social media,
Right.
but like in person. Maybe I can create tools that will allow people to do that when it comes to like breaking beyond just the surface level. But how do we learn to like really be in community with each other? And in the hope of that, several things happen, right? And this is things that I'm trying to continue to practice in my own life, greater empathy, greater love, but then also too, I think from that, what's produced is more individuals understanding their worth and their value. And from that, if we could, do I think we could save the world completely and just stop? No, like I think that we're always going to have a component there, but that doesn't mean that we can't put a dent into things and start curbing, tragedies and losses unnecessarily, So that's something that I would love to be able to continue to put out there.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
The very last thing before we say our goodbyes for today, if people are looking for you, where are they going to find you?
Everywhere. Instagram, Richard.Taylor Jr. Facebook and LinkedIn is Richard L. Taylor Jr. And then Twitter is @TrulyTaylorMade. That's like the one that I'm least on, though. My website is richardtaylorjr.com, and all of my info, social, and everything is on there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, just nice, consistent across the board, Richard Taylor Jr. So everyone can find
Trying to be as close as possible.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Josh.
This was a nice conversation. I really appreciate getting to know you a little bit better, because we've interacted, but I don't think we've had some real deep conversation yet. So this was nice.
Yeah, this is great, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person next month, too.
Yeah.
Let's go.
And once again, thank you to my guest, Richard Taylor Jr., for helping to lead the charge toward cultivating our mental health. I just love that he's out there right along with the rest of us, putting in the work to make positive and lasting change in his life, and inviting us to come along for the ride. He already mentioned how to find him, But take a look at his website, www.richardtaylorjr.com, where you can find everything else. And thank you for listening to the podcast and carrying the conversation out into the world. Music for this podcast is generously provided by Alexander Nakarada at www.serpentsoundstudios.com and is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Details in the description. If you'd like to come join the community, be a guest on the show someday yourself, you wish to support the podcast, or just get in touch, find me online at wanderontheway.org. And until next time, go have a good conversation.